Now, we are delighted today to welcome back to our podium a superb moderator and City Club member, Mary Dumas. Mary moderated last month's forum, which featured the candidates for the position of County Executive, Jack Lowes and Doug Erickson, and did such an excellent job that we really had no choice but to ask her to come back today. Mary's a longtime county resident and is the principal of Mary Dumas and Associates, which provides mediation, facilitation, and training services to both public and private sector clients. Please join me in welcoming back Mary Dumas to the podium.
Well, that was really nice of you, Chuck. Thank you. Is this working for folks? Can you hear me okay? I've had a bit of that cold that's going around. So let's welcome the candidates for mayor to the podium. Would welcome incumbent Dan Pike and Kelli Linville. And as they're coming up, welcome to clap for your favorites or think about what you're going to do. I hope you're both well as we head into this final stretch of what's been a long and busy campaign season and a lot of forums. So to remind folks of today's format that we'll be using, just want to get people oriented to the City Club structure. Each candidate will have 3 minutes for their opening statement. The moderator will ask a series of 5 questions, and I will alternate which candidate will respond first. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to these questions. We hope we've covered some of the key issues that we've seen tracking in the conversations in the community. The timekeeper today will actually be here to support the candidates, and a yellow card will be raised at 30 seconds remaining for your response, and a red card will be raised at 10 seconds, and when it comes down, your time is up, and I'll also remind you of time being up. And my apologies in advance if that includes interrupting you. The other candidate, after this initial response, will have 30 seconds to offer a rebuttal or to expand on their earlier statement. Again, you will have 30 seconds to respond, and at 10 seconds, that red card will go up, and when it comes down, we will both do our best to stop you on time, because we'd like to get to the next series of questions, which are those we take from the floor. So we have 2 folks with mics that will bring the question answering to the floor for City Club members, and we'll ask at that point in time for the candidates to respond in 90 seconds to those responses from the floor, or questions from the floor, excuse me. And today we will close with just that 1-minute closing statement. So with folks properly oriented to what is yet, I don't know what number forum you might have participated in yet this candidate season. Just want to get us all on the same game plan today. And I think you tossed a coin at the... No, we didn't. Well, let's do it now. You have a coin? Skip will be tossing and you'll be calling. Okay. This is for who will begin today with the opening question, and I'm asking you to flip. The opening question and the opening statement. Yep. You're on heads. Okay, so we will start with opening statement, and thank you. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody for coming here today and for participating. I think is the mic on? Is that better? Can you hear me now? Okay. I want to thank everybody for coming here today. I think civic engagement is one of the best attributes of this community. You know, I've thought a lot about government and its role over the last year or so, as I've heard a lot of people denigrate it. And I want to start my remarks by talking about why I believe government matters. And I'm going to tell you the story of my family, specifically my father's story. My father was born in a migrant labor camp on the banks of the Yakima River. And he was a premature birth, and so thanks to the U.S. Public Health Service, he survived that. As a child in the 1930s, he got polio. Again, thanks to government intervention, he survived that. He was incredibly bright, so he skipped a couple grades in high school. But having no family resources, he couldn't go to college, so he went to work for Fred Myers instead. The Korean conflict broke out, and like many young men of his generation, he signed up and ended up serving on a naval medic ship off the coast of Korea. Returning from that, he used the GI Bill to go to college. He graduated number 2 in his class from a small college in Portland, Oregon, and got a fellowship to Columbia University, where he got a PhD. And as a result of that, my life has been significantly different than it would have otherwise been. His life changed. Every one of his kids ended up getting at least a college degree. We've all been productive members of society. For those who calculate by finances, we've been paying taxes our whole lives. I think more importantly, that it allowed my father to fulfill his promise as an individual. And it gave lie to the statements that many people make that government can't do anything. I believe government can allow us to fulfill our individual promises, and I believe that my role as mayor is to help Bellingham as a community live up to the promise that it offers. And that's what I've been trying to do for the past 4 years. And I've been doing that through an approach of management using the triple bottom line of environmental, social, and financial attributes. And using that approach, we've had really good results over the past 4 years. We've got great bond ratings, bond rating upgrade. We've got a balanced budget. Our safety is better, crime's down 24%, and we've had some meaningful progress in terms of protections around the lake. Transit was restored after we lost it. And now we're standing up to fight a coal terminal that's a bad idea for this community, which fails every test of the triple bottom line. These are the values that I bring and that I want to continue putting to work with you for the next 4 years.
Time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting us here today. I had the pleasure of being here last month, so I know how this can be. I was here this last spring, and we talked a lot about the role of mayor. I have been involved in our community my whole life, and unlike the mayor, who has a very compelling personal story, I would be in Croatia or Sweden if my parents hadn't moved here. I was the first person in my family to ever graduate from college. And yet my father was a small business owner who was very expensive, very expensive. He was that too, and it was my mother, who started his own business. And what he taught me is work hard, be honest, put other people first, which is why I spent the last 17 years of my life representing this district in the Washington State Legislature. I believe that the role of mayor requires 3 things. The first is vision, the second is building a team, and the third is demonstrating results. I do believe also that talking tough and being tough are 2 separate things. Ask the Olympic Pipeline Company how tough I am, and they'll tell you. We need to have a good working team in the city government, which is why I'm very happy to be endorsed by the city employees, the supervisors and professional staff, and the police guild. Our budget, which is balanced on paper for this day, has enormous liabilities looming at us in the 2012 budget and beyond. We need to have a strong team that can work together, as they have in King County, to implement lean management to save as many services and as many jobs as possible. We need to respect the public process. Being in the legislature, you could not skip a public hearing. You could not skip an appraisal on a piece of property. You could not get an assessment on cleanup costs before you took on enormous liabilities for the city. Those are all public of decisions that need to be made in the public. And that is one thing I can promise you is I respect the public process, and I think you all should know as much about the decisions that are being made in the city as I do as your mayor. And finally, its results. I look out over the waterfront. I look out at the statistics on Lake Whatcom. And I look at our downtown and the number of people in our whole community that are unemployed. Getting us the kind of jobs we want when we want them is the most important thing, and that will be my focus. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for all your enthusiasm. In order to help the rest of the forum move with as much time for questions and responses, we're going to ask that during the moderator questions and the questions from the floor, that we refrain from clapping at the end of each response so that we can preserve as much time as possible for actual information exchange. We're happy you're enthusiastic, though. It's good to have a robust crowd and some energy behind that desire to understand the vote. I would also ask, in the event you didn't get a chance to do so, if you could silence yourselves. We'd appreciate that. So we're going to move to some of those hot topics that we know have been in the conversation, starting with leadership and management. And as a coin toss winner, we'll start with candidate Dan. The governor has asked the legislature to cut $2 billion from the current state budget. How will you lead the city through the challenge of prioritizing increasingly limited financial resources? You'll have 90 seconds for your response.
What I will do is what I have been doing for the past 4 years. For the past 4 years, we've been in a declining revenue environment. And during that time, we started out by identifying opportunities to make sustainable cuts across the city. We also worked with the City Council to identify our own priorities of government. We call them our legacies and goals. And so that every action that we're taking, we're looking through the prism of that metric, saying how does this help advance one or more of those goals. And really we've had to do that at a time when the state budget cuts, they were throttling back funds that used to come to the cities, making the challenge of balancing the city's budget harder. But by focusing on what was sustainable and what would flow forward in terms of savings, we've managed to find a glide path to a balanced budget next year. And we're actually getting pretty close to it this year. And so we will continue working on that in the years ahead. I would also just like to comment briefly that in terms of the liabilities that were referenced in my opponent's remarks, those liabilities are endemic. They're part of a budget process for a public entity. So, for example, we always have our 6-year transportation improvement program. There's always unfunded liabilities on that. That's just part of the process.
Thank you. Candidate Kelli, the governor has asked the legislature to cut $2 billion from the current state budget. How will you lead the city through the challenge of prioritizing increasingly limited financial resources?
Well, Governor Gregoire signed my Priorities of Government bill several years ago when the budget still looked good. And I was told, well, you don't look at priorities of government when they're good times, you look at it in bad times. I personally believe you look at it all the time. So you make sure that you have the right priorities that you're funding every single year. So I would look at the policy that I implemented before, the 2 years when I was responsible for putting together a $34 billion budget, and make sure that we have set the things that we have to do, public safety, our permitting that we need to do, our capital improvements, our environmental cleanups, all the services that we do, and then instead of managing by attrition, which is, I had a conversation with John Carter this morning, and I asked, how are we managing to have a balanced budget on paper when I've heard we haven't made any staff cuts? And he said, what we've done is we've managed by attrition. We have not filled positions. Well, for me, that's not a priority way to do things. If you have a policeman retire and you don't fill it, or if you have someone in the permit center not retire and you don't fill it, that's not a conscious decision on priorities. That's letting the process manage itself. And I think that we need to really know where the cuts are coming and where they're not.
Thank you. You both mentioned tools that you would use or strategies to help prioritize. Could you speak to the specific skills that you bring to effectively manage the city's 600 plus employees and other assets toward those goals? Again, we'll start with candidate Dan.
Do I start everyone?
For this particular round, and then we'll flip.
Well, first of all, I bring 4 years of experience managing the city effectively in a very challenging time. And so, I don't think that it takes much looking around to recognize that Bellingham is doing really well when you look at a relative scale. If you look at communities across the state, if you look at the state government itself, if you look at the federal government, you'll see that things are managed well here. We're not in a crisis mode, and we're moving forward. And so I've got the skill set of actually demonstrating that I can do a job that's a very challenging job to do, even when times are good. Beyond that, I also have a background of working in management for most of my life, for a good part of the last 15 years. And so, and management is different from legislation. It's a different aspect of government. I have a master's degree in public administration from Harvard. I've taken classes and I've got extensive coursework in public finance. I managed a $500 million project for the State Department of Transportation. And I managed that project through a $300 million cut that was effected when Tim Eyman passed Initiative 695. And I managed to work it through despite the fact that funding was challenging, and find replacement funding, keep the project on time and on budget. And so I will bring that skill set and keep using it in the next 4 years.
Thank you. Would you like the question again?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, you both provided a big picture of tools or strategies you would use to identify priorities. What specific skills will you use to effectively manage the city's 600 plus employees and resources to drive towards those priorities?
Well, I'll get back to relationships. I believe that when you look at having lean administration policies implemented in the city, it means working with your employees. It means asking them how you can do things more efficiently. At the state level, I did teamwork incentives, which was a way for state employees to come up with good ideas, and there were incentives to do that could give services, deliver services better, and save money. The second thing is you look at what you're required to do and what you want to do, and you make sure that you're doing what you're required to do first, and that means talking to the employees about how you're going to have safe streets, talking to your employees about how you're going to make the permit system work better. Then you have public discussions, and I think that we have very few public hearings on our operating budget. I'm kind of disappointed myself that I don't know more about the operating budget that was proposed. I believe that every step of the way, every time we make a decision when we're doing budget cuts especially, that we have public hearings with the city council to make it very clear what our options are and why we picked this option instead of that one. That is not clear in our budgeting process right now. So I think I understand the mechanics of budgeting, but I also understand the relationships with people, and I think those two things will make me a better mayor when it comes to managing times and tight resources.
Thank you. We have 30 seconds for rebuttal or expansion on your original answers. We'll start with Dan.
Well, I think, just a slight expansion is that I think that while relationships matter, the skill set to manage a $200 million budget in a management capacity, not in a legislative capacity, is critical. And it's something that takes time on the job to learn if you have not been exposed to that before. And so I think it's really important that particularly in times like these, that we not waste the opportunity to keep somebody in that already has demonstrated that ability and is fulfilling it for the past 4 years.
Kelli.
Well, I think that at least 3 of the city employee groups do not think that the management that has been going on is something that they'd like to consider for another 4 years, and I'm very sympathetic to that. That's a hard job. But the other thing is, when I was in the legislature, I was not just sitting writing thank you notes home. I was a committee chair almost every year. When I was Ways and Means chair, I managed 33 staff. That is more than the number of department heads we have. I think it's important to understand that managing people doesn't matter if you're in a big legislative role or in a role in the city.
It's good. It's good. So we're going to shift, and you'll be the first respondent to the question this time, Kelli. And this one has to do with jobs. Over the past 10 years, several stable businesses chose to grow their operations and moved outside of the city of Bellingham to do so. What will you do in your term as mayor to develop more living wage jobs within the city's available commercial and industrial zoned areas?
Well, I believe that the way that you address jobs is first you maintain the businesses you have now. There's nothing worse than being an existing business that's made a commitment to this community and have all the attention be on attracting somebody else here. So existing businesses first. The second thing is making sure that they have the opportunity to grow. It was very disappointing for me when Cascade Joinery went to Ferndale because they couldn't find a commercial spot that they could afford with a truck bay. Now this is a green builder, the kind of jobs we want here, and they're not here anymore. And finally, if you have a good reputation as a place to do business, then that reputation will travel word of mouth. I talked to quite a few people at the Business Expo, and several of them were going around asking if Bellingham was a good place to do business, and they were getting mixed reviews. Perception is reality. We have to make sure that the reality and the perception we have in Bellingham is we treat our existing businesses very well. We hold them accountable, obviously, for doing the right thing. We let them expand within our city boundaries, and that gives us a good reputation to attract jobs here. And then you ask the business community also what they think. Instead of deciding for ourselves what we think might help, let's work with our downtown partners and other business partners to ask them what the barriers are and what are some solutions.
Thank you. Would you like the question again, or?
No,
Okay.
I remember the question. I'd like to start by saying that I think the question is a little bit misleading in that you only present part of the equation. And so I think what it fails to recognize is we've had a lot of local successes, including companies like Blue Sea Systems, Pro CNC, both of whom have nearly doubled their presence in the city over the last 4 years, and they provide the kind of jobs that we want to have here. Index Sensors is moving here now. They're going to open in January and be expanding their workforce when that happens. And then just yesterday, we were recognized by the Washington Post as the #2 city of the top 25 as a place to do business in the United States for small cities. So I think if perception is reality, I think we're doing pretty well. I'd like to be #1, but #2 in the country is okay. But I do think I agree that it's important to have conversations with the business community. And in fact, I've been doing that on an ongoing basis. On a nearly monthly basis, I go around with Ken Opplinger, or sometimes I go around with Derek Long, Sustainable Connections. I talk to businesses that they select. I don't. And they tell me what is working and what isn't working in their relationships. And then there are other things that I've worked with within the employee group. So for example, I worked with the permit staff to figure out how we can move forward in a better way. And our permit system is entirely revamped. Our ratings are up 40 points over what they were 4 years ago. And the experience is so much different that even the BIA says it's a substantially different situation than it was 4 years ago.
Thank you. We'll have 30 seconds for rebuttal or expansion. Kelli?
I think we always have to make sure we're not comparing ourselves to other people, but comparing ourselves to our own performance. We do that for children. When I worked in the schools, we want to make sure that we count the progress they make every year, but we don't want to not expect the best performance out of them that we can. And I would say right now that Bellingham has everything that it would take to have a great, strong economy, and we can't rest on laurels. We need to make sure that we're not missing opportunities, and I believe that that's what has happened here.
Time. Dan?
I think that we shouldn't rest on our laurels, but I also think we do need to compare ourselves to others, because one of the things that I do recognize is that we are not immune from a global recession. I would love to say that there were things that we could have done to keep unemployment in Bellingham under 5%. The reality is we can't. Those are issues that need to be addressed at the state level where they haven't been properly addressed, and at the federal level where they've been improperly addressed. But what we do need to do is we need to keep up the lines of communication. We do need to maintain our standards and keep working and recognize we're never going to be where we need to be.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to shift a little, still in relation to job, but now at the waterfront. Okay. This time we'll switch, and candidate Dan will go first, and Kelly will be second. So the city has some 100 acres of waterfront lands waiting to be developed. How will you work with the Burlington Northern Railroad on access and infrastructure issues related to development in the waterfront area?
Well, I'm looking forward to continuing working with Burlington Northern. We've been working with them for the past 4 years, and we've gotten, for example, at one point, the port was struggling to get an agreement on relocating the railroad. Because of past relationships where I've gotten agreements signed with Burlington Northern in past jobs, the city took that over and we actually got that agreement signed. Even with the differences of opinion over the Gateway Pacific Terminal, Burlington Northern recognizes they're still staying at the table. They need to work with us and we need to work with them on shared interests, and that's what we're doing and that's what we will continue to do. So we've got some agreement already about how we'd like the alignments to be and what sort of approach we'd like to see in getting that rail relocation accomplished. So we will continue working on the relationships that I already have with Burlington Northern and also with the agreements that we've got in place to find funding to implement those agreements. And that's the biggest challenge right now, is finding the federal and state funding to put those agreements in place.
Kelly.
You want to repeat the question?
Sure. The city has some 100 acres of waterfront lands waiting to be developed. How will you work with the Burlington Northern Railroad on access and infrastructure issues related to development in the waterfront areas?
Well, first of all, the city interests have to be articulated very clearly. It has to be very clear that these are the interests that we have that need to be met. One of them that Dan didn't mention was the environmental impact of moving the tracks. There will be an environmental impact from that too, and that is another thing that has to be considered, not just the relocation. And then we need to make sure that the company, the railroad, the federal government are paying their fair share. This is not something that the city of Bellingham can take all on ourselves. The state has notoriously been reluctant to give money for rails because we can't take care at the state level of some of the highways that we need to work on. So I think it's really important for us to make sure that the money that we have gotten from the state is used wisely, but that we don't take on enormous responsibilities that there are other people that should be paying for. And that's where it comes to making everything clear right up front, and then not wavering on where you're trying to be, where you're trying to go, but being open to change the path by which you get there. And I think that's how you get through contentious decisions that have to be made, whether it's the waterfront, Lake Whatcom, EMS, or a multitude of other things that are facing the city.
Thank you. 30 seconds for rebuttal or expansion.
Sure. Well, I would just like to address the point that the state is notoriously unwilling to fund rail projects. Actually, if you look at every bit of siding that Burlington Northern has added in Western Washington over the past decade, it's all been paid for by state dollars. So they are willing to do it when the circumstance is for a compelling state interest. And I think that we can make that compelling interest here, and we will continue to make that case.
In working on statewide rail issues, I know that when we were getting sidings in eastern Washington, there was a lot of reluctance on the part of the state to do that. Judy Cliburn is the chair of the Transportation Committee in the House of Representatives, and she made it very clear what the criteria was for whether you would get state funding or not. And I think that we need to be very clear that we're not asking for something that is impossible, but something that's possible, and then holding the railroad company accountable for their part of this.
Okay, thank you. We do have a follow-up. There are other key partners in this effort at the waterfront: the port, the Public Facilities District, the State Department of Ecology, EPA. How will you work with other partners on these waterfront issues? And we'll have Dan respond first, and then Kelly. You'll have 90 seconds for response.
Well, I think that clarity is important in working with all partners, and I think that relationships are also important. But that doesn't mean that relationships have to always be that you're going out for a beer after you have your discussions. It means that relationships are ones where you each understand the other's position and understand where you need to find accommodation to move forward. The city has a very, very good relationship with the Department of Ecology based on close working relationships at the staff level. And I would say at the staff level, the city is also working closely with the port. And at the PFD, I would say that since we created them and since we have ongoing discussions with them about critical issues, that I think that our relationships there are strong as well. I think the important thing is that we provide clarity about what we need and they provide clarity about what they are looking for. And then we try to work through the differences between those positions. And those differences can be challenging at times. So for example, 3 years ago, there was a lot of contention between a vision the port had for building a Bellevue or Bellis Fair type project on the waterfront, and a city vision that involved building out from the current downtown in a way that complemented as opposed to damaged what we already had here. We had a series of meetings about those issues. The community turned out in force to support the city vision, and we've been working through those changes ever since in a positive way.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I have an established relationship with the port, with DOE, with all the partners that need to be involved in waterfront redevelopment, because I've been working on this for 12 years. So this is not a new activity for me. I think that one of the things that public meetings don't substitute for is a public process. And a year ago, we could have put our sub-area plan to the Planning Commission in the state that it was in. It didn't have to be perfect, and got public comment on whether or not we liked the first plan that was proposed or we thought that we should do something different. That was a year ago. And I don't believe that all the decisions have to be made before the public becomes involved. And I don't believe that a meeting at the Depot Market substitutes for a public process through the Planning Commission and through the City Council. We need to make sure that we distinguish between those two things and that we allow the public to say, we don't want to see this development at the waterfront, or we do. I raised the issue early on about liquefaction and sea rise concerns and whether or not those had been included in the original project, and they hadn't really been. So I think the sooner we get this proposal on the table, out in the open, clear for everyone to see, the better progress is the word I was looking for. The better progress we're going to make in moving forward.
Thank you.
Just to be clear, there has been extensive public process, and there will be additional public process as we move forward. But one of the things that you don't want to do is you don't want to do things out of sequence, because that results in a tremendous waste of resources. And the one thing that I've learned over the past 4 years is we don't have resources to waste. So giving an incomplete draft to the Planning Commission to start considering and to start having public hearings on before there is shared agreement between the city and port about what we want to be considered would be just a tremendous waste of everybody's time and result in a lot of frustration from everybody involved, including the general public. The reason the Depot Market Square meetings were important is because what those did is those provided inputs to me about what was important to this community as I sit in those meetings and advocate for this community, and I will continue doing that.
30 seconds for your rebuttal or expansion on that question.
I guess I'll never say that it would waste the public's time to be involved. I would never say that. It doesn't waste people's time to actually understand the process by which we make decisions and where you can affect them. That's a very important thing for an elected official to know and to do. So I still believe that we can give information through our public processes and have a public discussion so we're all educated on why we do this or why we do that, and we're not given a completed plan that maybe we have to change.
Thank you. We're going to shift to another subject matter, which there has been a multitude of public process and public meetings about, and that is the Lake Whatcom. As mayor, what is one specific improvement you'll make on the quality of water in Lake Whatcom? And this time it's Kelli who will go first.
Well, I'm sitting here looking straight at Harriet, and I know that don't look. I know that she and I have talked about this for very many years. We need to keep the phosphorus levels down on Lake Whatcom. And one of the ways I believe we do this is by what the city has been doing, which is making some purchases of property to prevent contamination. The second thing we could do, though, is to look and see, first of all, what the city is or isn't doing as far as the roads are concerned and the ditches that funnel water down into the lake, what everybody is doing on their yard, and setting a zero discharge standard so we have a way to measure, are we making progress or not? You can't claim progress if you don't know where you are and where you're going to be. So we have to have a standard set, and I believe that that's the first thing to do. Then I think that we also look at a backup plan. Some of the contamination in the lake happened after Georgia Pacific quit their flushing. So can we look at all the options to make sure that the lake water is not stagnant? Can we work with the PUD and others to make sure that everybody is doing everything they can? And secondly, can we work with the county with a standard in mind, zero discharge, to make sure that every decision either helps lake quality or we don't do it?
Thank you. Dan?
Thanks. Well, there's a number of things that I think that we can do. We've been doing a lot, and we will continue working. You know, one of the things I wish is there was better press coverage these days, because just this past week, partly in response to the petition I filed with Ecology last January, Ecology has stepped up and is requiring more stringent standards for development in the lake, and they're requiring the county to come up with better rules for how they manage their development in the lake. I think that's good news for everybody that relies on the lake for drinking water long term. I also believe that we should be supporting the reconveyance, and in fact, when the county was balking at part of the price tag, I worked with the city council and we agreed reluctantly that we would underwrite some of the ongoing costs to a small degree because we receive benefit from that. Unfortunately, that's still stalled right now, but I still think that that's an important action to take to protect the lake. I'd also like to address, though, the myth that flushing the lake works. You know, according to Dr. Robin Matthews, it doesn't have really any effect. And so I think that it's important to focus on what does work as opposed to being distracted by things that don't work. But I do think we need to continue focusing on looking for solutions, looking at better management. And we are doing things. So, for example, we put pervious pavement on the shoulders in North Shore Drive. That's an award-winning project that changed how the stormwater is managed coming off of our roads. We need to continue projects like that moving forward to continue minimizing the damage that we're doing.
Thank you. You'll have 30 seconds for rebuttal or expansion on that question.
Well, I wasn't looking to suggest that flushing Lake Whatcom is the option instead of anything else, but I'm just saying you have to be open to everything that might make a difference. Who knows where Academy Street is? Academy Street is like a funnel with water running right down that street into the lake. We need to make sure that we're looking at our own backyard in addition to somebody else's.
Dan?
Well, and the good news is we are looking in our own backyard. In fact, one of the things the city is looking at is different ways we can retrofit the developed area of the lake, much of which is within the city's boundaries. And there's some challenging geology there in terms of a lot of clay soils at the north end that make it hard to find areas that percolate well enough to solve it on a lot-by-lot basis, but we're looking for larger areas where we can do regional percolation of stormwater. And it's those sorts of efforts that we're going to continue working on going forward to turn this around.
We do have a follow-up question. This has to do with the resources, human, financial, and data that you would be drawing from to accomplish this work you've just described. So, candidate Kelli, first.
Sure.
You'll have 90 seconds.
There was a Silver Beach ordinance that was passed that we've invested a lot of money in doing. In working with Sue Taylor, who has been a Lake Whatcom advocate for a very long time, and Sue Blake, who works for Cooperative Extension, we were looking at the money that was expended for the Silver Beach ordinance, where we've gotten 60 people to sign up and no real difference made, to what Sue does in teaching people how to restore their backyards. It's what Dory Belisle did on the Nooksack River. Get everybody to do their part, and that accumulative effect would make a difference. We could have gotten, I believe, and in their estimate, 600 people doing something on Lake Whatcom for the same amount of money that we got 60 people signed up for. Now, to me, that means we need to look at the money we're spending now and make sure we're getting the best result for the investments we're making. And it's okay to do it in a small way, because every small action you take adds up to a large action in the end. If we wait to only do large actions, we will wait a very long time. So I would say it has to be a combination of everything. And what I do in my backyard that drains into the bay or the lake is very important in the cumulative effect of cleaning the lake up.
Dan?
Thank you. Well, I think it's not an either-or question about what you do. The Silver Beach Ordinance is actually incredibly important. It formed the template that Ecology has gone to the county with and said, we'd like to see something more along these lines from you. At the same time, we have actually been stepping up our education. There's always more to do, and there's always a challenge of resources. But I will point out that over the past 4 years, the city has put more money and more effort into management of the lake than was done in the previous administrations combined. And that's important because, I mean, and that's been a priority even in a time of resource challenges, because there's nothing, or there are a few things that are more critical than our drinking water supply and protecting it. And so that will continue to be a priority going forward, because it's important to this community to have a secure drinking water source. And we've had some success, but we have not yet achieved a turnaround of the decline in quality. And so that's going to be an ongoing struggle, because turning around a decline in a large water body like Lake Whatcom is something that takes decades to achieve. And so we had a year of success a couple of years ago where the degradation measures went down, but now they're back up again, and that's kind of what we're going to have to be facing. We have to know as we're going forward, we have to keep putting multiple approaches in play so that we can achieve long-term success.
Thank you both. We're going to shift topic because we do have some time here today that we want to move to the audience to be able to... That was a follow-up question to the original question. I think what we'd like to do is expand to another topic that we know is of high interest, and this is a final question from the moderator, and then we'll be moving to questions from the floor. And this has to do with the SS Gateway Pacific project. Given the limited legislative role for the city in this project's development and analysis, how will you position the city's leadership, time, and resources on this important community-wide issue? And we'll start this time, Dan, alternating, you're first.
Well, I think that it's important to remember that there are multiple ways to address a problem. And so you use the tools that you have. Sometimes you have regulatory oversight. In this particular case, the city does not. But the city does have resources to look at a problem and analyze it, say this is what would happen in our community because of this. And as mayor, I have the ability to reach out to my peers across the state and make a case to them about why a project like this matters. And so I've been doing that for the past, since June, when I took a very strong stand. I'd taken between the end of February and June to analyze all the facts as I understood them once SSA actually brought forward the draft of a proposal that showed that they were planning to ship 1 billion tons of coal through our community, for starters. And I looked at what that did to us as a community, what it did to our public safety, what it did to our economic development, as well as what it did to us from an environmental perspective. And then I shared that information with mayors across the state, and I've had really tremendous success in having mayors sign up and say they want to be on board, asking for full mitigation or just an outright opposition to a project that they also view as a bad idea. And more recently, I've started having those same conversations north of the border. So that's just a sampling of the kind of approach that I can take and be effective, even though we don't have regulatory oversight.
Thank you. Kelli?
Well, I was here, I said in the spring, and one of the comments I made was I don't support exporting non-renewable natural resources like coal. That was in the Herald article. I have a copy if anybody wants to read it. And so I have never supported a single coal pier at Cherry Point. I've never supported exporting coal. And so I think what I would have done in December, instead of proposing a resolution in favor of the coal terminal from the mayor's office, I would have started the public process then. I would have basically said, what can the city do? What can the city do? And what the city could do is the mayor of Bellingham could propose a resolution to the city council in opposition. I don't think that has happened. The mayor of the city could have gone to the mayors of the small towns in Whatcom County and the county council members, not ask them to make a decision, but let them know that in our comprehensive plan, we have a multi-purpose pier that is not intended to ship coal. The mayor could have done that and influence the people that do get to make a decision now on the shoreline permit, which is the county council. The Seattle mayor, the Spokane mayor, and others have no more authority than the Bellingham mayor does in making this decision. We need to influence the people that do,
Time.
And that's the county council.
We'll have 30 seconds for rebuttal or expansion. Sure. Dan?
Well, actually, I did advocate within the city council for a resolution to be put before the voters, so the voters could have expressed an opinion this fall on how they felt about this proposal. Unfortunately, the city council decided not to put that forward, but I think that was a good idea. I'm glad you agreed with that idea. I would also say that you know, I have got letters, you know, and if you would like to sign on to the letter that the other mayors have signed on, I think that would be wonderful.
30 seconds.
Well, I do not support an advisory vote on an issue that the city cannot take a position on because it costs $35,000. We don't have $35,000. So propose a resolution to the city council and tell them that we do not support this pier, and that doesn't cost anything.
Thank you. So we will shift now to take questions from the floor. We have two folks out there with mics. If you would stand. And Jane's in the back over here. We've got someone here. If you're a City Club member and you'd like to pose a question, and let me restate this, a question, an open question, the kind that allows the bulk of the time to go to the candidate with the question. And then we'll move through alternating sides of the room. So if you'd like to stand or get in line or put your hand up, they will be cued to follow up, alternating from room side to room side. So I'm going to reward Jane, who's working hard to get over there, and take the first question from here. They will have 90 seconds to respond to these questions. We will not have rebuttal. We will simply keep going to allow more questions to you because you've been patiently waiting for your turn to ask. So
my question's for both candidates. In regards to the waterfront development, would you be in favor of public ownership with long-term leases to developers for that property, or selling that property off immediately?
We'll start with Kelli.
I'll start. Well, first of all, I think we have to do what makes economic sense for the. We have to do what makes economic sense for the city in these times. I don't know if it makes a lot of sense to sell the property off. I don't know if that makes a long-term strategy. Certainly, long-term leases are a good strategy. It depends on then who wants to invest, and it also depends on what we want to do down there. And we don't have a clear picture of what we want. we can't presume to know what we're going to do with the property.
Dan?
You know, I think we've got enough clarity of vision to know what we want. But the problem that I would say is that it's not the city's property. That property is actually the port's property. And so while I might have an opinion about how I think the port should deal with that, I'm going to actually let the port deal with that. And I think that the port is also a public entity, and I would advise people that if they have opinions about whether or not that should remain in public ownership or should be leased out or should be sold altogether, that they communicate that with the port. And that'll be part of the conversation that we have going forward about how we manage this project.
Thank you. No, we were going to simply move to the next questions to allow more questions from the floor.
Kelli,
And this time, I just want to be
sorry.
clear that Dan will be answering the question first. Kelli will be answering the question second.
Well, my question had
Thank
to
you.
do with Kelly's position on the Gateway Pacific Terminal. I don't see
So I
any
got to
reason.
tell her what it is?
Yeah, I can tell Dan, and he can tell her.
So we will, just to clarify, the questions are going to be posed to both parties, whether they're
Sure.
singularly interested for
Okay,
you.
to both of you. Kelly, I'm confused about your position on the terminal. You criticized the mayor for.
No.
So the question, sir?
As late as
The
last
question?
week, I just let me. If it is a coal terminal, you would oppose it. If it is, do you still have some doubt that what's being proposed at Cherry Point is a coal shipping terminal?
Thank you, sir.
Well, let's just say that because I had doubts when the mayor came out in favor of it, I never came out in favor of this terminal.
Sir,
Yes,
we're going to
he
let the
did. I'm
candidates
sorry.
answer the questions. And Kelly, go ahead. You have 90
I'll talk
seconds.
to you after, and I'll give you the proof. But I never came out in favor of the terminal. And the truth is, as an elected official, part of your job is to make sure that you are managing a public process where anyone is treated fairly. So I think that the problem I had with the mayor's coming out so strongly against it is it wasn't based on any kind of a public process. It was based on his opinion. I'm glad he changed his mind. I'm glad he doesn't support a coal terminal now. But in the past, he wasn't so sure that exporting coal wouldn't be okay. In fact, when we were here at City Club, he suggested when I said I don't support exporting, that it would be okay to ship it through East County. And I said, I think that's just shoving the environmental problem off on someone else. Sir.
Thank you. Dan, you'll have a chance to answer that question. 90 seconds.
You know, I guess I do share some of the confusion about what your position has been over time, because there's been numerous changes in the language on your website and in your literature, even over the last couple of days. And so I think that just feeds some of the confusion. And in terms of my own position, you know, I was in favor of a multi-purpose facility. When they came out with their information, when SSA came forward with their information February 28th, I put out a series of questions that I wanted to get answers to. I never did get satisfactory answers to them. I analyzed the information that came to me from a variety of sources, and then I took a very clear position that I think has been very clear to people since June 3rd.
Thank you. Jane over here has the mic and another question. Again, the questions will be asked of both candidates, regardless if your question is directed to one. And this time, Dan will go first.
Hi, I do have a question for both candidates, so I'm doing the right thing. I would just like to know, in your time as leaders, what have you done to advance women's issues and women specifically? Thank you.
Well, speaking for myself as mayor, one of the things I've done is I've made sure that the city maintained its commitments to the nonprofit sector. And the reason that I'm saying the nonprofit sector, there's some areas specifically like the Domestic Violence Commission where we've maintained funding because that's a critical aspect specifically for women. But also women are inordinately impacted by poverty issues, and by the city maintaining our partnerships with the nonprofit groups that support the safety net that we have at a time when it's fraying at the state and federal level because of inappropriate cuts to those safety nets at those levels. I think that's critical support for women's issues. You know, I also want to be clear that on a personal level, I've always supported Planned Parenthood. And so I just want to be clear on that because a couple of people have told me that they got calls suggesting that I was anti-choice. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands that both Kelli and I scored 100% on the scorecard that Planned Parenthood and NARAL put out.
Thank you. Kelli?
Well, except for what I've done personally as a community member in the legislature, I have, especially as the budget chair, been very clear that Planned Parenthood is a priority and was awarded an award from them for maintaining their funding when the budget got bad. It's a smart investment. And while says he's been getting calls about being anti-choice, I've been getting calls about being anti-gay. And I'm sorry, but I voted for every civil rights bill. I voted for domestic partnerships, and Ed Murray, who is the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, is going to be putting out a statement for me on the Planned Parenthood website to make sure there's no confusion about whether I support civil rights or not. So I'm happy that I had a chance to say that in this room. Thank you. But those are the things that I have done. And I also believe that in mentoring and promoting women. And so when you look at the people that have worked for me, I've always had female assistants. They've always gone on to do bigger and better things. And I'm very happy to have the support of the National Women's Political Caucus, NARAL, Planned Parenthood, and other women across the community.
Thank you. Question from this side? Question here.
This is for Mayor Pike. I'm sorry to leave
Well,
you
this
out,
is
Kelli.
for both candidates. Candidates will answer both questions regardless.
Well, okay, this is going to be difficult for Kelli to respond then. When the voters passed the Greenway levy on a number of occasions, they've established an endowment. The intent of the endowment is to use the interest that's earned on the endowment to be able to fund needed maintenance that's required on those properties as the park system expands. Now, some of those. Sorry.
The question.
My question is, over the last 4 years, you've been taking a number of those dollars and using and offsetting other employees that are typically funded with general fund dollars. Now you go and you buy an additional 100 acres. How do you plan on utilizing the endowment monies that have been established for maintenance to when you have less of those dollars to maintain acreage as the park system expands, in particular the 100-acre woods?
Thank you.
I'm a little confused by the way the question was worded. I think that what you're suggesting, which I've heard some people confused about, it has to do with the fact that we drew from the endowment funds, we borrowed from the endowment funds to complete the purchase of the 100-acre woods. And that's just a budgeting tool. It's just as we were investing those funds in banks before and getting a rate of return on those, we're investing those now in ourselves. And unless the city is in a position where we're going to default, which I will tell you, since we've got a stronger bond rating and we've got a council that I'm sure is going to keep on top of it, and I will tell you that I will continue staying on top of our financial situation. We're not going to default. We will pay the going rate of interest back into the endowment fund as those funds are repaid. And we could have taken it from any number of funds. We just had to park it in a fund. And so John Carter and I talked about it, and we agreed that that was sort of one that made intuitive sense, even though in some ways I regret doing that because people get confused and thinking that somehow we're damaging the endowment fund, when in fact I would argue that the city is a better bet than many banks these days as a place to park your dollars.
Thank you. So, Kelli, in response, the question is the practice of management of park maintenance endowment funds.
Well, is my time still going? I'm exasperated here. No. I believe that if you were going to make purchases of property, that we get an independent appraisal to know how much it's worth. We take it through the Greenways and the Parks Committee to make sure it's a priority. And then if we're going to borrow funds, we have a way we say we're going to pay them back. None of those things happened in this purchase, whether it was a good purchase or not. They didn't happen. The resolution that was passed by the City Council says, and this is according to John Carter, that if this money is never paid back, then the payment on Chuckanut Ridge will come out of the Greenway 3 funds. Now, these are funds that were supposed to be for the whole community, but it will come out of there. And I think whether you think it's going to get paid back or not, if it doesn't, that's where the payment comes from. We needed to know that ahead of time. So I guess that's what I'd say is I would follow a clear public process to buy a piece of property and make sure we knew how we were going to pay for it, and negotiated the heck out of Washington Federal, who did not have another purchaser in line for this property. We could have gotten it without having to pay interest on a loan. So I would say that we probably weren't as hard-nosed as we could have been on purchasing this property.
Thank you. We've got a question over here. This time, we will have Kelli go first.
So given that
Talk right in there.
Be brave. Be very brave.
Given that we have now purchased the property, and the plan is to it has been to pay the bank with the money from the endowment fund, and we've done that, and we're going to pay interest to the endowment fund. How are we paying that money back?
Well, I think that was what I think that's what the council.
What's your, as mayor, in the next 4 years, and I understand in the wisdom of whoever it's been extended like to 6 years, which could be past whatever the next mayor's term of office, what is the real plan to the citizens of Bellingham to pay that $3.2 million back?
Well, with interest, it'll be closer to 5. But I would say that right now, what I heard at the public hearing was Seth, I don't mean to use your name in vain, Fleetwood, mentioning that the property would be used for collateral and that some of it would be sold to pay off the loan. Another opportunity is to find another revenue source that would pay off the loan, whether it's an LID or the idea, I think, of having Greenways 4 pay it off was pretty much not supported, and I don't support that. So the options aren't very clear right now how you'll do it, and I believe they should have been clearer before the purchase was made.
Dan, your turn to 90 seconds for response.
Well, first of all, to be clear, there is a payoff plan in place. That was in place when we purchased the property. The plan in place is to sell off enough of the property to satisfy the $3.2 million, which will grow to less than $3.5 million over the course of the loan. To pay that off through selling some of the property. But recognizing that there's a considerable interest in a fairly significant aspect of the community in finding another route forward, you know, the idea is to have a community conversation about what we as a community want to do. Would we rather find an alternative to selling off some of the property? I think that there's a lot of people that would. I know that some of the folks in responsible development are saying they would like to, and they've committed to trying to raise $1 million, so that then you're only looking at a $2 or $2.5 million charge left. And so look at the variety of opportunities that exist in this community. And you know, I will say that the capacity of this community to come up with creative solutions far exceeds the ability of myself or the council to identify every opportunity that's out there. And so I think that rather than presuppose that we have all the answers, I think having that conversation with the community is a good way to approach this and see if there are better answers out there that will satisfy the diverse needs, the diverse interests that this community brings to this problem.
Thank you. Jane has a question over here. Again, in order to preserve the maximum amount of time for candidate, please formulate your questions with more question than preamble.
I also am confused about Kelli Linville's position on the coal port. I was at the Western Washington Forum last week where you said that you were aware that it was a coal port back in October of last year and that you're against a single-purpose coal port. So my question would be, A, why didn't you use your position in the community to tell us then? Why are we hearing it now? And B, if you are against this, how can you accept a campaign contribution, the maximum allowed, from Pacific International in October of last year.
In October of last year, I was running for the legislature. I was not running for mayor. And none of the people who I am being accused of being bought by, I guess I'll be blunt, have given me any contributions during this mayoral race. So, secondly, I think my answer to you up in at WWU was much clearer than what you've just expressed. I said I did not support exporting coal. I did not support a coal terminal. I supported a multipurpose pier that did not ship coal. I don't know how much clearer I could be. I'd like to just go back to the community conversation. If we wanted a community conversation on the purchase of Chuckanet Ridge and use all the creativity that is in this room or in this community, it would have been a good idea to have the community conversation before we signed a contract with Washington Federal, not after. It's a little late. Late is better late than never, but that is a conversation that should have happened before the ink was dry on any contracts.
Thank you. Dan, the question was formulated for Kelli, but you do have 90 seconds to speak to the matter of the coal port and single nature of her
Sure.
prior history with this issue. So I don't know how else to frame it for you.
Well, no, that's
It's not
okay,
really your
because
question.
I just would like to express a question that I continue to have, which is that for most of the past year, what I kept hearing was that you were in favor, that Kelli is in favor of a multi-purpose pier, or a multi-purpose pier. Those are the words that you use, and that if this is proven to not be a multi-purpose pier, then you would oppose it. So the question I continue to have is, are you in favor of the proposal that the proponents currently have on the table? And if you are not, what have you been doing to try to stop it?
It's a larger general question you have. You will have a closing statement, so you can address that question in your closing statement or return to whatever you had thought you would like to cover today during your closing. We didn't have a format today for you to pose questions to each other, so I don't want to put someone on the spot there. It means you posed a question that will not yet be answered at this forum. But I want to allow the rest of the City Club members their opportunity to ask questions. And we do have time for one more. Thank you for being succinct.
Are we any worse off having purchased or made the commitment for Fairhaven Highlands than we would be otherwise? Aren't we better off having made that commitment?
Dan will answer this first, 90 seconds. Kelli will follow up.
No, I don't believe we are. I think that buying that property for $1 million and change less than it was appraised at in 1995, for $3.5 million less than the bank paid for it, for nearly $4 million less than the assessed value, which is less than a year old even now from the assessor's office, is a good deal. And we have opportunities to determine how, at a price that at least a couple of members of City Council thought was committed to in the Greenways levy. There were 3 different opinions on City Council. I'm sure there's a lot more than that in the community at large, ranging from 4.1 to 6 to 8 million being committed for this property. We spent 4.5 because I believed that it was a compromise that allowed an opportunity to move forward as a community past what had been a contentious issue for a long time. I realize now that in the heat of a political race that no good deed goes unpunished, and so I'm and so I recognize that, and I understand that there's a lot of concerns, some of which are not political in nature, some of which I think are. But I will say I feel very proud that we got this under public ownership after 25 or 30 years of the public wanting to have control of this property.
Thank you.
And you know what I think? I think it probably was a very good thing to purchase, but anything that's worth doing is worth doing right. That's all I'd say. So it's not that I'm opposed to this purchase. It's just that I believe that there is a process you go through to purchase property. And according to John, it's first of all, you have an appraisal for what the property's worth. This appraisal was not a recent appraisal, and it was not done by the city. And I think that would have been a really smart thing, because then everything that Dan just said could be supported. But it can't be right now because there isn't an appraisal for it.
Thank you. So thank you all from the floor for your questions. We have a final minute wrap-up for each candidate, and that will close our forum today with some concluding remarks by Chuck. So I just want to thank the candidates and invite you to do your closing 1-minute statements. And as you tossed first, Dan, you'll go first, and Kelli, you'll end.
Thanks again for being here. You know, in the past 4 years, I want to say we've accomplished a tremendous amount despite the economy. We've restored the lost Sunday transit service and sped up our bike and pedestrian improvements. You know, if you go down to Ban Holly, you'll see what an amazing revitalization has happened in that area. We've got permit center improvements, you know, at the Millworks co-housing celebration. The owner of Ike Homes said that they could not have built that project 4 years ago before the changes that I shepherded through the permit center. Despite the challenges, we have been making real progress on the waterfront. We are very close to delivering something to the Planning Commission to move forward with. We've gotten a lot of awards and recognition. We're number 2 of the top 25 places for business. We're the NRDC's #1 Smarter City. We got the EPA Energy Challenge. We were #1 for that, and a lot of recognition for our efforts against the coal port. I want to ask for your vote and continue this vital work moving forward.
I'd like to bring positive relationships, respect for the public process and responsibilities of elected officials, and results to City Hall. We have to have good working relationships as we face the challenges we face. We have to work with the port on the waterfront. We have to work with the county and the water and sewer district on Lake Whatcom. We need to work with the county and the small fire districts on EMS. Everything relies on having a clear goal, a clear purpose, and a way to get there. I want to be your mayor because I want to see in 4 years that the lake is stabilized, that there's matching funds being generated off the waterfront, and that our neighborhoods are safe and vibrant with affordable housing. And that's why I'd like your vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Don't leave. Please stay. Don't leave. We have 2 quick points and then a comment. You'll see in the corner we had, you probably have noticed, another film crew. They are testing their process to go live on election night in our community from 3 different locations. And if you want to know the link for that, it'll be on our website next week. So on election night, instead of getting drunk at the various places, you can turn on your computer. So we'll post that. Yes, you could. Probably you could. The comment is, it's obvious to a lot of us in the room that it takes a special person to run for public office. And thank God we have a couple who are willing to do it. So thank you very much for doing that. And then the last thing is we have a tradition of giving a gift of a book to our presenters. A new book we are now giving out, well, today, Bellingham Then and Now. It seemed appropriate to us. But we have 3, and we only have 2 presenters. So the third one must be for Mary Dumas. So Mary, please. And thank you for coming. There you go.